We would like to welcome Mr. Sergi Kapanadz today to CEU, and actually welcome back because Mr. Kapanadz is also the alumnus of Central European University. Professor Kapanadz is Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Georgia, as well as the lecturer and professor of Tbilisi State University, Faculty of Social and Political Studies, Department of International Relations. Mr. Kapanadz's professional involvement in Balazs is not limited to national security discussions, relations of Russia and Georgia conflict resolution, and related bilateral and multilateral negotiations, as well as negotiations on Russia accession to WTO, negotiations of EU and Georgia over association agreement, EU enlargement, and EU relations to Eastern partners. The discussant today's session is Professor Dr. Peter Balazs, formerly Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary and professor lecturer at Central European University and a director of Center of EU Enlargement Studies, well known in CEU and redundant. And the topic for today's public presentation, public lecture, is EU and its relations with the Eastern partners, case of Georgia. So we would suggest that actually the presentation is taking about half an hour, and then it will be open further to the audience for remarks and questions related. Thank you very much, and let's welcome Mr. Sergi Kapanadz to CEU.
Thank you very much for the warm reception and this introduction. It's actually very exciting for me to be back here at this in this building, because I used to study here 10 years ago, and it's my first time back since those days to be here. As I like to look at it in the capacity as a diplomat, but also in the capacity as the academic, I can say quite honestly that both of those careers have been rather conceived here. So it's pretty much symbolic that I come back in those with those two hats to discuss the issues on which I work, not only in the practical terms but also in the academic terms. So I'm very glad to be here. I will make a brief presentation without the PowerPoint on the Georgia-EU relations in the context of the European Union's relations with its neighbors and with the Eastern partners. And then I hope to have a discussion with those who are interested in this topic, and also maybe other aspects of Georgia's foreign policy. The Eastern Partnership, of which, as you are probably well aware, together with Georgia, there are 5 other countries, our 2 neighbors to the south, Azerbaijan, as well as Ukraine, Moldova, and Belarus, is the policy of the European Union, which aims at many things, but as we like to see it, it aims at bringing the neighbors closer to the European Union in various fields. For us, the Eastern Partnership and the instruments that the Eastern Partnership has, it's a tool for approximating Georgia with the European Union. And it might be a bold statement on our side, on our behalf. We don't usually say it very loudly when we speak with the Brussels bureaucrat or the diplomat, but I think here in this audience we can say that the Eastern Partnership for us is a tool to get Georgia closer to the European Union and to eventually get the membership of the European Union. That's not a short-term perspective, but in the medium to the long run. Now, the tools that the Eastern Partnership has, we think, are pretty much the same kind of tools that used to be there in the enlargement or in the pre-enlargement processes of the European Union. And I will name a few of them and where Georgia stands with regard to those instruments. The first and the most important one that we are involved in right now is the association agreement negotiations with the European Union. It was said here, I intend to be the deputy head of the delegation that negotiates with the EU, the association agreement. We started the negotiations over a year and a half ago, and we're confident that we're quite advanced in the negotiations. We have finished pretty much 80% of the chapters in the treaty, and the remainder is are not the problematic issues. So we're hopeful that the negotiations on the association agreement will be concluded quite soon. What probably is going to prolong these discussions is another aspect of this agreement, which is the free trade component. because we now, together with the association agreement, are also negotiating the free trade agreement with the EU, what we call the abbreviation DCFTA, the Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement. That was launched or announced by the European Union December 5 of the last year. We had the so-called zero round when Commissioner de Gucht visited Georgia back in February of this year. And actually tomorrow we're starting the first round of negotiations on the DCFTA in Tbilisi. We'll have the team of the Commission representatives visiting Georgia, and the negotiations will be launched formally. Now we expect for these negotiations to take around a year and a half, 2 years. It's probably the realistic expectation. Usually the DCFTA negotiations take a little longer than that, but we have had a preparation period of about 1 year. These negotiations were supposed to start quite early, back in 2010, but at that time the European Commission put forward certain conditions on which we had to work for about a year. So now we're starting the talks, but most of the acquis, which is part of the DCFTA, has already been adopted by Georgia and has already been implemented. So we hope to, somewhere around 2013, to conclude both the association agreement and the DCFTA, and to move forward with the implementation of these two. So these are the two important instruments that we are currently pursuing with the EU. We think that this has been a very positive development in the thinking of the European Union after 2008, that the opportunity to enter in the association contractual framework with the neighboring countries has been proposed by the EU, and we plan to use all the opportunities stemming from this agreement. There are obviously a few issues which are related to this agreement and its negotiations. The usual traditional apple of discord remains the statement over the European aspirations of the countries. This has been the case with almost every single country who has been in the negotiations with the EU and who wanted to become the EU at the time when the EU was not yet ready for the membership. It has been the same discussion with Ukraine, before that with a number of Eastern European countries, but we hope to have the adequate reflection of our aspirations in this agreement, so that this agreement does not preclude the possible membership of Georgia, and actually paves the way for that when time comes. Another important instrument that is offered by the Eastern Partnership, Georgia and the other partner countries within this framework, is the framework for liberalizing the people-to-people relations and liberalizing the visa regime. And we are now involved in the dialogue over the visa liberalization. The dialogue is going to start within a few months. We've already had the first assessment mission, which have been quite positive, so we hope by the middle of this year to be officially engaged in the dialogue over the visa liberalization. This has been preceded by the agreement on the visa facilitation between Georgia and the European Union, the same kind of agreement that the EU already had in Ukraine and Moldova, and also the readmission agreement, and they go hand in hand. They're the kind of package that the EU offers for those countries who want to liberalize visa regimes. Now, we hope that the negotiations over the visa liberalization will not last more than a year and a half. So actually by the end of 2013, we hope to be done with the negotiations with the association agreement, DCFTA, and the visa liberalization, and to move on to the next stage. We've actually had a very high rate of compliance with the facilitation agreement and with the readmission agreements. Just to give you some figures, over the last year, we've had, as of March 1, 2012, we've had about 600 something requests from the EU member states on the readmission, and more than 90% have been complied with, and only 50 or 60 has been put on hold, mainly because of the problem with identifying the people on which the readmission requests come. So I mean, we've had the highest compliance rate actually among the 6 member states, among the 6 partner states of the Eastern Partnership, and that actually has been quite helpful in persuading the European Union that Georgia has to be upgraded to the visa liberalization negotiations. We've had a number of reforms as a result of these relations with the EU over the visas. We've gone quite at length on the document security, on the immigration management, on the border security, and this has been, and the role of the European Union has been quite instrumental in us undertaking these reforms. There are also other instruments, other frameworks, contractual framework we have together with the European Union. They fall a little outside of the Eastern Partnership scope, but they are actually related. The two of them that I think are important is the one on the aviation. We have entered into the aviation agreement with the European Union. It has not yet been ratified by all the EU member states, but since 2010 it has entered into force before the ratification, so it will be applied post ratification by those states who haven't ratified it yet. And another one is important agreement that we have concluded with the EU, which will enter into force actually in 1 month. It's an agreement on the mutual recognition of the GIs, the geographic indications related to the agricultural products and the other foodstuff. And that will be important in terms of protecting our products here in Europe and protecting European products back in Georgia. So these are the instruments that the Eastern Partnership offers to Georgia, and we have been quite delighted with the progress that we've had in this framework over the last 2 years. Now, if you look at the way forward for us, there are discussions now within the European Union, within Brussels, and a number of member state capitals about the future of the Eastern Partnership and about what kind of relations should the Eastern Partnership entail for the current members after the association agreement and these other instruments are utilized and concluded. We think, and this has been the message that we've been delivering across Europe, is that we think that the Brussels or the European Union member states should come up with the action plan, with the roadmap for the Eastern Partnership, the roadmap which would envisage the period of the next 2 years until 2013, and which should include the provision on the timely completion of the association agreement, the CFTA, and the visa liberalization processes. And then at the next Eastern Partnership Summit should also devise a new roadmap to define what will be the next steps for those member states, for those partner states which want to become members of the European Union, and how these aspirations can be met. So we have a very optimistic outlook on the Eastern Partnership, something that I need to say was not always the case in the Georgia-EU relations, or for that matter in the relations between the EU and the other partner states of the Eastern Partnership. You probably well remember that from 2004 until 2008, the number of European Union initiatives towards these states have been met with the mixed reactions. There's been a mixed reaction when the neighborhood policy was introduced back in 2004-2005. It was a mixed feeling because a number of European partners at that time, like Moldova and Georgia, felt that this was too little too late. And a number of others within the European Union at that time felt that it was too much too early. So there was a little contradiction in the feelings at that time. Also in 2008, when the Eastern Partnership was being devised at that time by the Swedish and the Polish friends, in close cooperation with the Eastern European members of the European Union, there has also been this overwhelming feeling in a number of Eastern Partnership countries that this was also too little too late. But it turned out to be an adequate instrument, an adequate tool that the European Union has devised. And if you look at it now, a number of Eastern Partnership states seem to be quite satisfied with these instruments. And because there is an understanding now that these instruments actually offer the tools to get the countries closer to the European Union. Obviously, the main criticism or the main the discontent, if one may say, with this policy is the lack of clearness, the lack of clarity that many, including academics, but not only, but also some policymakers, think is a little problem. What I mean by clarity is that this instrument lacks the so-called ultimate carrot, the carrot of membership, or the carrot of knowing that once you do something right, you actually become a member of the European Union. However, those who are more realistic understand that you don't actually need a statement of the carrot right now if you know that the progress you make will be adequately reflected and adequately assessed by the European Union. The principles that we value very much, that are the underlying principles of the Eastern Partnership, are the principle of more for more, which has been expressed very clearly in a number of documents related to the Eastern Partnership. This is probably the policy way to define what in academics is known as the policy of conditionality. So the more for more instrument is very valued for us, but we understand, we hope that this instrument will be employed more intensively, particularly vis-a-vis Georgia. And the second important principle which we think is underlying this Eastern Partnership instrument is the principle of differentiation. I will stop on this one for a few minutes because this has been a differentiation is probably the policy way, what in real life is known as jealousy, or what is known as being unfairly treated, not because of you, but because of others. There has been a number of cases when, for instance, Georgia has felt that it has been unfairly treated by the European Union, that the progress has not been sufficiently reflected, adequately assessed, because us being treated as part of the South Caucasus region, and because the other neighboring states of ours have failed to move forward as fast as we have. But this is not a feeling that is only peculiar to us. The same kind of feeling you could see in Ukraine 2 or 3 years ago. The same kind of feeling was driving Moldova back in 2005-2006 in its relations with the, at that time, neighborhood policy. And the same kind of feeling was quite obvious, for instance, in case of Estonia at the end of the 1990s, when Estonia has tried to redefine itself from the Baltic state to the Central European state, or Slovenia has tried to redefine itself from the Balkan state to Central European state. And we think that this principle of differentiation is an important principle because we believe that all states have to be based on the, have to be assessed with a merit-based approach and not with a regional-based approach. Because we think that in these Eastern Partnership countries, there are states who have clearly defined obligations, a clearly defined vision towards the European Union, and they have undertaken internal obligations to fulfill most of the commitments that the EU sets forward. And at the same time, there are countries in these 6 who either have lukewarm relations with the European Union or quite skeptical for that matter. So we are in the group of 6 where you can actually differentiate who are the 2 countries that actually want to go forward rather fast, who are the countries who are hesitating, and which are the countries that do not have the declared ambition to become the members, do not have the declared European aspirations. Now, having said this, one also has to give credit to the European Union for taking these 6 countries out of the wider group, which was at that time known as the Neighborhood Policy Group, because at that time we were in the same group with the Northern African states, and there was a need for the double differentiation. First, because European neighborhood policy covered not only Eastern European states but also the Northern African states. It was a similar approach to a whole range of countries from Morocco to Belarus. And so there was a need for the double differentiation. First, differentiation between the North Africans and European partners, and then the second differentiation within the European partners. So I think we are on the right track there, and it's very important that this principle of differentiation remains and remains an underlying principle of the Eastern Partnership. The third principle, which is important there, is the principle of the joint ownership. And this is an important principle because we see the DCFTA negotiations and then the DCFTA framework and the association framework as a framework, as something which is not only for Georgia but also for the European Union. So these are not the instruments only to bring the Eastern partners closer to the EU, but these are also the instruments for the European Union to benefit from being close with the Eastern partners. So this principle of the joint ownership is an important principle to us. However, we also have the feeling that the principle of joint ownership should not be overestimated. Sometimes joint ownership is used by some states or some individuals as an excuse for not doing their homework, saying that these are the things that I don't want to do because it's not in line with the joint ownership. So I don't really own this idea that I have to implement a certain regulation. This is in general about the Eastern Partnership. Now, after this, there is still another important aspect, which one has to talk about when the Georgia-EU relations are discussed, and that is the role of the European Union in the security and stability of Georgia. Because today, more than ever, the European Union is present for the foreign and security policy of Georgia. One can say that since 2007 and particularly 2008 war, the European Union has become one of the major players on the ground in terms of security. The European Union is currently involved in the negotiations with Russia in the Geneva discussions as a co-chair and the principal leader of the discussion. by the way, something which was quite unimaginable, I would say, 6-7 years ago. And that was one of the main foreign policy goals of Georgia back in 2005, 2004, 2006, to bring the European Union to the table in the negotiations that we had at that time. And it was quite unimaginable. The EU's position, the EU's involvement was limited to the observation. It never went beyond observation. And even in the observation, I would dare say now, 7 years on since then, that it was a passive observation, not really the active observation. And it has changed dramatically since 2008, and now EU is a principal actor which is involved in the negotiations, and it is quite clear that no settlement of the conflict, no peaceful resolution of the conflict can or will happen without the European Union. And that is something that we very much value and very much appreciate. It's also important to note that the European Union is now present on the ground, something that was not the case until 2008. The European Union now has a very strong European Union monitoring mission on the ground, which monitors the ceasefire line between Georgia and Russia. It is unable to enter the regions in question, the occupied territories. However, the monitoring it does on this side of the occupation line, the dividing line, is very important to us. This is one of the strongest, one of the biggest missions that the European Union has. It consists of more than 300 personnel, out of which more than 200 are the observers on the ground. And it is one of those few missions where all European Union member states have sent the monitors to and have contributed to. So it's a very important physical presence on the ground of the European Union. The third pillar of the European Union's involvement in the Georgia's foreign policy, once again, this is unrelated to the Eastern Partnership framework, but still a very necessary one, so that I have to mention is the role of the European Union in upholding Georgia's territorial integrity and sovereignty on the one hand, and pursuing the engagement of the populations who live on the other side of the dividing line on the other hand. This is what the European Union likes to call the non-recognition/engagement policy, kind of a double header, where on the one hand you have the non-recognition of the status on the ground, and non-recognition of the so-called independence of these regions, but at the same time you have the policy of pursuing the engagement of the populations who live in these regions. And this is the vision which is very much shared by the government of Georgia, which is very much appreciated that we are on the same page on this together with the European Union and the rest of the civilized world, with the United States, with the other representatives of the so-called political West. And this has been very important because the European Union has shown that it can contribute significantly to the confidence building between the divided populations. And there are a number of projects which are being implemented currently in this so-called bottom-up approach, when the bridges which have been destroyed in 2008 and also before that, we're trying to rebuild through the bottom-up process, to bringing together the populations and the communities which are now divided by which have been divided by the war. This is, in short, what I wanted to say. I pretty much talked about the other aspect, pretty much all the aspects of Georgia's relations with the European Union entail today, and I'm sure that there will be questions on this as well as the other matters, and I'll be glad to answer.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, friends, students. I will start the discussion as a discussant, but I would very soon give you the floor for questions and comments. Let me make still a few observations. First of all, let me welcome on my behalf as well the fact that Eastern Partnership has been separated from the very general approach of what was called European neighborhood policy, putting into one single sack all the neighbors, all the so-called new neighbors by that time, starting with 2004 with the big enlargement. The EU was taken by surprise in identifying the new neighbors and making a difference between them. Today we have a much better approach with all the challenges of the Mediterranean, then the specificities of the Western Balkan region, ongoing negotiations with Turkey, and the so-called Eastern Partnership. So it's definitely better than it used to be a few years ago. 6 countries is a manageable size. In spite of all the difficulties with the 6 differentiation problems, adding that even the 6 is subdivided into 2 sub-regions. One are the closer neighbors, closer to the Slavic language, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, and the South Caucasian 3. But I think taking a closer look, we can see all the differences between and among, even within the sub-regions, and the EU should be aware of that. At the same time, I've never hidden my criticism on the name of that new framework project. Tell to any person on the street of Kiev that what we mean by Eastern Partnership. They will say Russia. Of course. So it's a very selfish, egoistic, Brussels-based vision of the world that is from us. I have suggested several occasions to change the name into European Partnership because Eastern is seen from a given point of the map and certainly not from the capitals of these countries. This is misleading. The EU likes to call everything Eastern in the emerging part of Europe except the Western Balkans, which is a promising name for that part. Okay, apart from that, I think that we have to face in that area of the so-called Eastern Partnership a few major problems. One is the unsettled conflicts, and we have quite a number of them. The other one is the undecided nature of internal politics concerning foreign orientation. It changes with governments. We could see it in Ukraine, that one drive is more in favor of EU and NATO, and then comes another government which is changing and then tries to keep a balance between East and West in a way. And it may happen in other countries as well. So we haven't got that kind of a deeply enrooted engagement, what we could see in what we call today the new EU members, in a country like Poland or Romania or others, which were deeply convinced, and there was no danger whatsoever to change their orientation, this Western drive. In the Eastern Partnership countries, we can never be fully convinced that it would stay as it is today. So we would need some more evidence to believe that we could invest more on the EU side. At the same time, I fully agree with saying too little, too late. Yes, Eastern Partnership emerged in May 2009. We have had last September the second summit meeting with a half-hearted engagement on behalf of the EU. Not all the member states are equally interested in that project. We can see more involvement of the eastern half of the EU, Germany and new member states and a few others, and maybe less enthusiasm in the western located old member states. All closer relationship starts with the famous freedoms. I like to reduce the 4 to 3 because the freedom of services is an illusion even inside the EU itself. So let's speak about trade, the movement of persons, and investments. And they may involve for services to a certain extent, but not fully. For trade, good luck to the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. It will be a very important step, and it's a highly demanding degree. Requires a lot of institutional and legal investment on behalf of Georgia. For persons, again, good luck. Let's improve the situation. It would have a very good impact on public support in the country towards the EU. And this deep and comprehensive free trade is already laying down the basis for a better investment climate in the country. It's helping a lot, but parts of the acquis communautaire would add to that atmosphere. For the time being, we have a larger big gap between the eligibility of Georgia for EU membership, no doubt about that. According to Article 49 of the Basic Treaty, Georgia is a European state, so can apply for membership, of course, and the feasibility of that project. There is a time gap, and the challenge for politics how to overbridge that gap, keeping the interest of people alive, not playing the membership card too early. These are well-known problems. It used to be a problem in Serbia until recent times, and then in other countries, how not to lose the motivation of the country, and giving something to both sides. More and more is an excellent slogan for that. And then finally we have two additional dimensions, because relationship between Georgia and the EU is one thing, and there are two other much more sensitive dimensions. One is the extension of freedoms at the region. Not only with the EU, free trade and free movement of people, but with the other Eastern partners. First of all, the South Caucasian neighbors, because it wouldn't work otherwise. The interest of the EU with that framework program is to extend those freedoms. So, to face all the difficulties and then to work on the free movement. Just imagine free movement of people in that area, and the very close increasing trade. What we have reached in the Visegrad countries after long years, claiming differentiation and having all kinds of problems, but one day it comes, and this is a very important precondition for EU accession. EU rapprochement is a very sensitive combination of both direct, individual conditionality and regional reconciliation efforts. Both are needed. And there is an even more sensitive dimension behind us, that with the new neighborhood regions, the EU has come closer to big neighbors. When we are in the Balkans, we can never forget Turkey, which is there culturally, economically, and emotionally. In Kosovo, in Albania, in Bosnia, in important parts of Macedonia. And when we are dealing with the so-called Eastern partners, there are even two big giants behind them. One is Turkey in the south, and the other one is Russia. Russia, after the very recent new political events, nobody really knows what Putin re-elected would bring into foreign policy. But it would be an illusion on behalf of the EU to believe that we can just take away or pull on our side those countries, forgetting that behind them there are very powerful and highly interested other partners. Of course, we know that Russia doesn't like the expression we have tested several times, the common neighborhood with Russia. And it was bluntly refused, that this is not your neighborhood, it's our neighborhood. Of course, the neighborhood is common in reality, but the question is how we regard that neighborhood. Is it a ground for competition between two poles of attraction, or is it an opportunity for cooperation between those two poles of attraction? This is a real challenge, and in the South Caucasus it's even more complicated, because not only the EU and Russia are there, but Turkey as well. So it's a triangle of various power influences. And we have to have in mind, of course, EU dimension comes first, regional comes second, and the big course of attraction behind is. So I would suggest those questions for discussion as well. You have the floor for questions and comments. Yes.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation. I had the pleasure to go to Georgia about 6 or 7 years ago, and it's my favourite country. And that's somebody who's English saying that. In a sense, the problem with Georgia is geographically it's in the wrong place. It's the wrong side of Turkey. Can you express a view on whether you feel it will be necessary for Turkey to become a member of the EU before Georgia could possibly be considered? Or do you see the outermost regions principle of the EU, where some really quite remarkable places are parts of the EU, including some in South America, as being a model to follow, whereby Georgia could become a member of the EU and it's geographically separated from the main EU regional bloc?
Okay, let's collect a few questions. Yes, please.
I'm coming from the Romanian Embassy in Budapest, and in 2011 we've been witnessing the Central European year with the two successive presidencies of Hungary and Poland, which both expressed a very committed interest towards this Eastern Partnership project. And because we're hearing more and more about the reinforcement of the Central Europe when tackling the EU current topics, like Minister Marconi recently addressed this issue right here in CEU. My question regards especially what is your expectations, or how do you feel the Central Europe, I don't know, the V4, the V4 Plus could bring as an impulse, as a contribution in order to move forward this project? And I would also be interested in hearing Mr. Balazs comment on this issue.
Thank you. There is. Yes.
Maybe linking my question to the first comment, I'm from the Center for Eastern Mediterranean Studies here in the CEU. We've been running for a year now a higher education policy program with partners in the region, so all three countries, mostly Georgia and Armenia, but also Azerbaijan. And this was, let's say, a background feeling that Georgia is not in the right place geographically. But otherwise, it seems that from both Armenia and Azerbaijan, there's quite an attitude that Georgia is the middle player there. And that Georgia is the country who can provide the background for both of those two countries to maybe, who knows when, but maybe meet each other. I mean, it's impossible to invite Azeri colleagues, though they would like to go to Yerevan, but politically it's unacceptable for the regime there. And the Armenian colleagues, though they would like to go to Baku, they cannot do that. But also in this framework, I mean, we had witnessed that guests we had in Tbilisi, where we met in September, from Armenia, had not been to Yerevan but to Tbilisi for 30 years or 25 years. So it was their first visit to Tbilisi. I mean, high scholars in their field. They are 4 hours apart by car. And this was a very important shock for us, that people in the region working on very similar topics, I mean, we're doing historical studies, did not meet each other. They would rather meet in Paris or in Berlin than meet in Yerevan or Tbilisi. So my question would be, how does Georgia see itself as an engine to the region and not only of getting out of the region? Okay.
Okay, I'll go one by one with the question, but then also come back to some of the comments that Mr. Balazs has made, because I think these are the issues that are important to us. The wrong side of Turkey. Well, it's yes and no. If you look at the feeling, if you look at the polls in that region about feeling European, or about getting closer to the European Union, or about the attitude of people to the policies of the governments towards the European Union, you will see that in Georgia you have the highest support. And I mean, these are the, just a few months ago we had a poll by the CRRC, the Caucasus Research Resources Center, and then just also a few weeks ago, or a few days ago, we had a poll by the National Democratic Institute. And these are the figures that I find striking, that in that region, in Georgia, you have close to 70% of the support of the government policies toward the European Union and towards the European aspirations as such, which is not necessarily the same numbers that you have either in Turkey or in Armenia or in Azerbaijan. What this shows is that for the people, geography does not really matter that much. So yes, if we were on the other side of Turkey, probably our chances would be better. Or not on the other side of Turkey, if we could switch with Moldova, maybe our chances would be better. But this is probably not going to happen. So we have to live in the region where we are. But what is important is that the population has pretty much made up its mind where it wants to go. And this there tends to be a very strong European identity among the Georgians. And I think that's very important. That's also to resonate with what Professor Balazs has said on Europe not being sure if with the new government the country is going to change a course. And obviously there are reasons for that thinking, and particularly Ukraine comes to mind because there you actually had that switch. However, even in the case of Ukraine, the switch or the reverse was with regard to the NATO and not that much with regard to the European Union. Even the current government of Ukraine is quite pro-European, at least in the declaration. One can argue whether they are pursuing the goal as actively as the previous government used to do, but it seems to be that they want to be closer with the European Union. And it's actually same with Moldova. In Moldova, you also had the change of government, and even though the previous government was relatively, I would say, not pushing proactively for the European integration, even in the communist times in Moldova, you had a rather strong European drive. So I think that when it comes to the European Union, in this region, at least three countries, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, have shown that the population tends to stay rather pro-European. I'm not sure about the other three. In the case of Belarus, it's probably not in these ranks. It's probably rather at the bottom of the six. But I'm also not entirely sure about Armenia and Azerbaijan for the other reasons. So whether Georgia can become a member without Turkey, I think it can. When that happens, I think it can. If you look at the history of the enlargements, when Greece joined the European Union, it didn't really have a shared border with the EU, and when Portugal was joining the European Union, there was debate here in Europe about whether Portugal actually was a European country because of the past it had, because of the type of government it had for many decades, and also because of being the peripheral country on the other side of Europe, obviously, but still. So I think these are the debates that usually take place, but by the end of the day, in today's world, I don't really think that having a geographic land border is that important, especially now in the current globalized state of interplay in economy, and also we do share the sea border, so the water border, so we're not entirely on the other side of the earth. So I don't think that is very important. However, having Turkey closer with the European Union is important to us. So the closer Turkey gets to the EU, more integrated it becomes, the better it is for us and more our chances increase. But I would still view Georgia, if it is to be viewed, if it is doomed to be viewed in the regional context, I would still view it in the context of a wider eastern neighbors, and not necessarily in the context of Turkey and the South Caucasus. By the way, it comes to the point of whether it's good to call it the Eastern Partnership. I do agree with the sentiment, but at the same time, we also think that being called East is good because we remember the Eastern enlargement, and at that time, what was Eastern then actually became part of the EU. So, but now it is. It seems that the concept of East has moved from the Eastern European states or the Central Eastern European states to a little more to the East. So, and when we say East, we actually, in our thinking, we mean east of EU, but not as east as Russia, but rather in the middle there. So obviously we could think of a better term, but it's quite satisfying to us. Actually, some Balkan states are also considered to be the southeastern Europe. That also reinforces the point that Eastern is not entirely bad. But then it comes to the point of another question, which was about the role of Georgia in the South Caucasus, region. This is a very challenging region in the South Caucasus, even though I think that this is not really a region in a classical sense because of many reasons, because of the divergences in political aspirations, because of different cultural, religious, ethnic, linguistic differences. But still, if one can treat it as a region, I think one thing I can say is that it's a very challenging region. And therefore, I don't think that it's feasible to view it in the same way as one would view, for instance, the Balkans or the Baltics region, or for that matter, the Visegrad region. Because there are differences in that region, between the South Caucasus states, which seem to be rather unsolvable at this time in the history. And the differences that you mentioned, and also Professor Balazs mentioned, are quite strong. You know, if you take the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, I cannot think of, I don't think that this conflict will be resolved within the nearest 2, 3, 4, 5, even for that matter 10 years. I don't think our conflict can be resolved in 10 years, to be honest. I don't think that the other conflict can be resolved before that. And that puts this region in the unique situation, in a situation in which you cannot really condition getting the countries of the region closer to the European Union on the cooperation within the region. Because right now we have a situation when, you know, they don't speak with each other, our neighbors don't speak with each other. And if the European Union asks us to devise the regional projects, no matter how hard we try, there will not be regional projects. There will be bilateral Georgia, Armenia, or Georgia, Azerbaijan projects. But it's very hard to think of the regional projects which involve all three states, even in the areas which are relatively unpoliticized, like the environment, for instance. Even though today, even the environment can be extremely politicized, especially in the South Caucasus. So I think, and that's actually the reason why we have been pushing forward the idea of differentiation, and that's why this idea has been rather embraced by the European Union, because there is an understanding that even though it's important to have the regional links, you can't really condition the relations on that, because it's highly unlikely the regional issues will be resolved in the nearest future. And we've seen, as I said, quite a few times why we have suffered because of the absence of the regional dynamic in our relations with the European Union. But the role of Georgia, as we would like to see it, is being a hub for the region and being open for the region. You know that just recently we have removed the visa regime for the Russian citizens. And you know, one would think that this is an outrageous step, and how can a country who considers to be in a hostile relations with Russia can unilaterally remove the visas. But our approach to this is that we want to make sure that Georgia is open for our neighbors. We want to make sure that the economic, cultural, social, people-to-people contacts in the region are not held hostage because of the political differences between the countries. And that's why you see the immense increase in the number of tourists who come to Georgia. You're right. One of the commenters here said that many Armenians have not been to Georgia, and I agree with that. And it's actually vice versa also. Many Georgians have not been to Armenia and Azerbaijan. But at the same time, together with that feeling, you also have the statistics, which shows that over the last 5 years, you have about 4 or 5-fold increase of Armenian and Azeri tourists in Georgia. And last year we've had, last year actually, the number of tourists from Armenia and Azerbaijan was the highest for the first time in the history of Georgia. And you can see that, for instance, if you go to the resorts in the western part of Georgia, you see that they pretty much enjoy each other's company at the seaside, Armenians and Azeris, even though they don't have a good relations. So this has been increasing. That's why we want to make sure that our role is that of a regional hub, that people from the lower region come to Georgia for whatever non-political purposes they might have, and that includes Russian first and foremost. And then actually, the number of visitors from Russia last year has been close to 200,000, which is one of the highest in the region. We can still improve and increase, but it's been quite on the rise. Same actually applies to Iran. We have now, since the last 3 years, the visa-free regime with Iran. So in our neighborhood, we don't have visas with any country. We have removed visas for the European Union back in 2005. Azerbaijan, Armenia, we don't have visas for many years now. Same with Turkey. Now same with Russia and same with Iran. And that's how we view our role. With Turkey, even we have come to the point where we don't even need passports to cross the border with each other. We can actually cross the border with the ID cards, which is an unimaginable level of cooperation or integration in that field of border management in that region. You don't see that with any other country. And we want to show to the other neighbors of ours this is possible, and you don't necessarily have to be on a non-speaking terms with each other, but you can actually have very integrated relations. There was a question on the role of the importance of the drive of certain ideas by certain regional states like the Visegrad Four. And obviously you cannot underestimate that. I mean, the Eastern Partnership has emerged as a concept that was at that time promulgated by the Swedish and the Polish and Czech governments. And it became possible because of the drive from these three. And I'm not quite sure that had there not been that particular drive, Eastern Partnership would not have materialized. It was also a smart play with the interest of, at that time, French presidency to have the Mediterranean put back on the agenda. So it was kind of a trade-off that, okay, Mediterranean is put on the agenda because of France, but then because of the Eastern partners, you have also Eastern dimension put on the agenda. So I think it's important that there are drivers within the European Union of certain ideas. And that does not only include, by the way, the Eastern neighbors. The whole Barcelona process was driven by Spain, and now the whole Mediterranean policy is driven by France, and the whole northern dimension at that time was driven by the northern members of the European Union. So it's a natural thing which happens in the EU, and I think it's important that this momentum continues. You know, we're here in Budapest, and Hungary is one of the active members of the so-called new group of friends of Georgia, which we established 5, 6, rather something like 6, 7 years ago. Was not a popular idea back then, to be honest. A number of Western European countries thought that this was a bad idea, that we were trying to play the European countries against each other. Because at that time we had the group of friends of the Secretary General, or the group of friends of Georgia, who was dealing with the conflict. And when we introduced the concept of the new friends, or the NGF, new group of friends, it was not treated very positively. But the time has shown that it is a very important framework, and a very important concept, and a very important instrument of cooperation of Georgia with the Eastern European states. We just had the meeting of the political directors of the NGO countries in Georgia a few weeks ago. And it's important because it's in the interest of the Eastern members of the European Union to have a certain policy vis-à-vis the Eastern Partnership. And they use this framework for actually advancing their interests as well. I think I pretty much answered the question that you asked, unless there's somebody has to follow up.
Yeah, thank you for the answers.
Just a comment, I'm fascinated by this inter-regional collaboration, cooperation question. I'm Canadian, and there's a myth about established states that sometimes they're conflict-free. And our countries has been quite riven with conflict, and especially regional conflict. And one of the ways, and there's some constitutional differences, but one of the ways in which collaboration, cooperation can happen between different members of a distinct region, is, regardless of how concrete the region might appear, is on common humanitarian concerns around issues like public health, perhaps disaster planning. There may be other ways in which you can get some intra-regional collaboration, break down some of these barriers, by identifying some common humanitarian interests that transcend the older conflicts. Disaster planning for earthquake relief, public health issues. If you look at the way barriers broke down in things like SARS, I mean, there's quick ways around public health and some public health issues where you can get people collaborating, even through expert networks. whether it be public health experts or other government experts, and develop closer links and ties on those sorts of things, and then expand those links and ties to other areas.
Just to comment,
Yeah.
I agree with you completely, and I think that one of the ways to also resolve conflicts is to precisely pursue that path. We back in 2009, less than a year after the war, in August 2008, the government, and I've been an active part of that particular process, has devised a strategy towards these regions, and then the action plan for engagement. And the bottom line for that action plan and the strategy is that precisely having the humanitarian, social, economic contact between the populations in the war-affected areas where the historical sentiments are relatively fresh, that have been at war just a few months back, was the way forward towards conflict resolution. Now, and we have embraced it back as early as in 2009, just a few months after the war, which you don't really see very often in the post-conflict situations. The problem there is that when you have 2 or 3 states involved, that is a good idea, but you cannot you need a partner in the tango. You cannot do it alone. You need the other side also to pursue the same path. And for instance, we have now this action plan, which is hard to implement because you don't have the partner on the other side. You have sometimes a situation when even the humanitarian cargoes are not allowed over the line because they think it's a political issue to allow somebody from the south. And you have the similar attitude in the other states in the region. What we are saying is that because you have this, there's a way how to solve this, but as long as this is not solved, we cannot be held hostage for this frozen relation. That's why we need differentiation. Those who have found ways to get out of this, then they have to move forward. And that will be used by the European Union to get the other states on board.
Okay, yes.
I have a comment and a question. So I am originally from Hungary, but I've been living in the United States for a long time. And I just wanted to share with you that in the US, I think the word Eastern has a very positive connotation. It connotes long history, ancient wisdom, ancient architecture, etc. So, but for European Union purposes, perhaps you could change the name to the not so Eastern Partnership. That's just a joke. Anyway, and the question is, I was wondering, I remember you mentioning that the #1 underlying principle of EP is more for more. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, and then we are closing the questions. This is the last question.
My name is István Szabó, I work for Science at CEU. And I'm really glad that this social, economic, humanitarian policy should not be held hostage by the political situation issue came up, because I was just going to ask the same question, like, could you a little bit elaborate more on how exactly the Georgian plans look like towards these conflict regions? Like, are we talking about, I know that it's not working at the present time, but what would be the plans? Like, are we talking about exchange programs? Are we talking about investment programs besides humanitarian? How does it look like?
The more for more, well, this has been an underlying principle of the Eastern Partnership since 2009, and it was particularly stressed at the second summit that took place in Warsaw in September 2011. What is meant by that is that those who are undertaking more reforms can and should qualify for more aid from the European Union and for the closer relations with the European Union. Now, this is the concept. Now, what it means in reality is that those states who are farther advanced on the, for instance, negotiations of the DCFTA should get the conclusion of the agreement before the others do. Because if you look at our region, now we have Ukraine, which is done with the negotiations, and very soon they will have the initialing of the agreement, of the association agreement. However, probably not signing, because the European Union is putting forward some preconditions before the signature. And Moldova is right there also, and then you have Georgia after that, and you have Armenia, Azerbaijan, who are just starting the process, which is going to take longer. Now, if we, and we think we will, advance fast on on these negotiations, we shouldn't be held hostage and wait for the others to catch up. That's one thing. Second thing is that once a country undertakes the reforms necessary for, or the reforms which are necessary for, let's say, certain aid, or which are necessary for instance, getting closer in the visa liberalization process, then it should be rewarded by the European Union with an adequate response. So that's the principle of the more for more. Now, we're talking here about only 600 million euros in the framework of 2010-2013, which is not that much if you look at it. If you look at the budget of the European Union over the 7-year period of about 800 billion, 600 million for the 3-year period is not that much. And that's a blanket that has to cover everyone. So those who are acting better, let's say, should have the opportunity to get more of the blanket. That's how I would like to look at the more for more principle. Now this also means that once this principle is applied, those countries who have bigger ambitions will be treated with a stricter way. And we have no problem with that. Sometimes conditionality is considered to be a bad word in the policymakers. We don't necessarily think it's a bad word. We think that's rather a tool to move forward the reforms. Now, one thing which here I should say is that most of the reforms we are undertaking in this particular field, we don't do this because of the European Union. I mean, the reforms we do in the field of migration management, in the field of economy, we don't do this because of the EU. I mean, one could think that EU is actually accelerating the reforms. I would agree with that. But the reason why we do these reforms is because we think these are the right way to go. This is the right way to go. So it's not the linkage there is actually vice versa. There was the point made by Professor Balazs on the eligibility versus feasibility of Georgia and how to maintain the momentum and how to maintain the reforms. And I think that even if the European Union continues saying that it's too early right now to speak about the membership of Georgia in the European Union, we're not going to abandon this reform simply because we think that's the right way to go. We might have a slower path because of that carrot being absent, but we will have the track handles. On the policy of how we see the conflict resolution, there are two tracks there which are important. And we have now come to understand and to have a clear vision of what these two tracks are. One track is the resolution of conflict between Georgia and Russia. Because we think that you cannot really resolve the conflict there unless you have sorting out the relations between Georgia and Russia. And most of the issues which are at stake, they have to be decided between Moscow and Tbilisi. Obviously with the participation of the other players as well, in and through the internationalized peace process, but these are the two main players there. For instance, if you talk about the status of this region, if you talk about the withdrawal of the forces, if you talk about the international presence in this region, these are all the issues that you have to discuss with Moscow. It's Moscow who uses the veto power in Vienna or in New York. It's Moscow who decides on most of these things. It's Moscow who is part of the ceasefire agreement. So this is one layer. However, as long as this is not implemented, we don't find this as an excuse for not pursuing the other path. And the other path is the path of engagement. And path of engagement for us means that we acknowledge that we also have problems, sometimes even substantial ones, with our Abkhaz and Ossetian compatriots. That's why this issue has been flared up at the beginning of the 90s, and that's what also continues to be a major disagreement today with these two groups. And we need to sort out the ways with them. Now, the way how to sort out the relations with Tkhinvali and Sukhumi for us goes through the engagement. And by engagement, we mean that we want to open up. Now, what does this mean to open up? First of all, it's trade. We want to open up the trade between Georgia and its two occupied regions. We don't want the lines which are there to be the artificially divided. We don't believe in the Berlin Wall being possible in the 21st century. And we don't believe that you can actually stop the trade between the divided populations artificially with a barbed wire. You can do it for a time, but you cannot really do it forever. So that's one thing. Now, how do we promote the trade? There are different ways how this can be done. I mean, even today, you have a number of people who come down from Abkhazia to come to Tbilisi to buy state goods and they take it back. And it's very natural because economically, these regions have always been linked with the rest of Georgia. You cannot imagine South Ossetian economy prosper because it's only connected with Russia through a narrow tunnel. Whereas with the rest of Georgia, it has an unregulated, geographically unregulated, let's say, border. There is no, you know, they talk about the state border of South Ossetia. There is nothing. There is no geographical dividing line. You know, the border, the so-called border, sometimes goes in the backyard of a peasant who never thought that that was a border that he was crossing 10 times a day. So you cannot close it down artificially. What we want is that we want to exploit it, exploit in the positive words, in positive terms, and to open up the trade. By the way, we had a very good experience of that. We had the first war back in 1991, 92, 93. As early as 95, we actually had the revitalization of the economic relations. We had a very strong economic ties in both of those regions. Now the problem there was that those were not healthy economic relations because they started on the drugs and the smuggling. So they actually were a big challenge for our economy and for the other economy as well. But if you can have it in a healthy way, you can actually have the restoration of relations between the people. Then you have the whole other area of the social and the healthcare and the humanitarian. Even today, we have a big number of Abkhaz who come to Georgia, to Tbilisi, for the medical treatment. It's very natural because when somebody is dying, they don't think of politics. The other option for them would be to go to Moscow to get to be operated on whatever, and to pay for that several $1,000s, whereas they can do it for several $100, just a lot closer in Tbilisi. So once you have the humanitarian and the social issues at stake, you don't really think in terms of politics. And I think it's a healthy thinking. You know, sacrificing one's life when you need a surgery for the political reason, I don't think is entirely rational. The third one would be the educational projects, because in those regions you cannot have those regions will not have a future as long as they're not exposed to the Western education system. And I don't think that elites, even if we can talk about the political elites of Tskhumali and Sukhumi, even though I'm skeptical about that term, but even if we can talk about them, you cannot have those elites without the proper education. And unfortunately, right now, they cannot receive the proper education. I'm not saying there is no opportunity for a proper education in Moscow. Obviously there are, and it's probably one of the best places. But not for those people, because it's too expensive, because it's too far, because they don't really qualify for the best universities there, and also because so far they have had a very limited reforms in the education sphere. And I know a lot of people who go to these regions to conduct lectures, and they are quite shocked with the level of education, and that has to be changed. Now, the way this can be changed is to open up the Western education institutions for them. And the fourth one is travel. I don't think that by isolating these regions, anybody can solve the problem. That's why we want to open up the travel opportunities for them. We have devised, as one of the instruments in the action plan of engagement, the so-called status-neutral travel documents. Because there's a dilemma now. Now, if the Abkhaz want to travel to Europe, what travel document do they use? One thing is for them to use the Russian passports. They can use the Russian passport, but the problem with them is that this Russian passportization has been an illegal process, which has been acknowledged as such by the European Union, United States, and the other places where they actually need to travel. So they wouldn't recognize them as a valid travel document. The other opportunity would be to have the Georgian passport. We would gladly give it to them, but they don't want to take it. That's why we have devised a third alternative, which is to have a status-neutral ID, a status-neutral travel document that they can take and go, and by taking the document, they are not pledging allegiance to the Georgian state. So giving them the kind of opportunities to get away from the political differences and to enjoy their life as a normal human being would do somewhere else in Europe. So that's the policy of ours. It has been coming rather slowly, but we understand that we were ready for this when we were drafting in 2009. We don't think that you can do this overnight. But then we also think that human beings are rational beings, and they will always find ways how to optimize good for them and how to maximize their profit. And if they can find the right instruments for that, they will do so. And we want to give them these right instruments.
Thank you for the answer. As a very short closing remark, let me add a footnote to the territorial aspect of the EU. It is not stipulated as a provision anywhere in the treaties that the EU could only take direct neighbors. But this has been a fact. This has been a fact with one single and not very fortunate exemption, as is Greece. Referring to Greece is not very useful in these days. Of course, Greece had a very close relationship with Europe through the sea, as always. But the EU project itself has very strong territorial references, the customs union, the implementation of the everyday rules, the Schengen zone. Of course, you can be married on the two coasts of the Atlantic Sea, but marriage is much more enjoyable if you are living under the same roof. So it is not the same thing. But everything is feasible. I agree with you with electronics and controlling things. Now, we are working on a very interesting project in our center. We have just taken the last enlargement report of the EU Commission, and there are 9 countries named by name as candidates at various levels. Turkey at the negotiating table, Iceland as well, and the 7 so-called West Balkan countries. And we have just added them to the actual map of the EU, and we've got EU 36. This is the title of the project, EU 36. And we are analyzing with a very strong international team the various aspects of that next project, which is not in the conclusions of the EU Commission, but is in the text itself. All the countries are there. And we came to major conclusions so far. One is this territorial attachment of Turkey to mainland Europe, not only through the channel of Romania and Bulgaria, which is already there, but across the Western Balkan region. It would be much better for Turkey and Europe to create that interface through the Balkans. The other conclusion is that the EU itself is a peace project, is a historical reconciliation project, and the EU has always stipulated historical reconciliation before the door of entry. That is a very strong precondition, following the example of Germany and France, not importing new conflicts into the EU. So it's you should consider that, and we have very serious questions to put on the Western Balkans as well, which is with Serbia as a candidate is already developing. Serbia has changed very fundamental points on Kosovo and relations to the neighbors, but it was very clear that this is a precondition. So we can do a lot of things without membership. We should push, and all the new member states, as I have seen, are pushing Georgia closer and closer and closer to the EU with the help of trade, movement of people, and creating a better investment climate. And I can add one more chapter, which is a very large chapter, extending trans-European networks to the South Caucasus. Trans-European networks of energy, of environment, and transport of all kinds, multimodal transport. This is another help to attach a relatively remote territory to mainland Europe. So let's do it, let's work on it, let's not waste time and keep things moving. This is the best advice we can give to Georgia, and let me thank you for your valuable